Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We will get started in just about a minute or so as we continue to let some people into the room. My name is Tara Jackson with Arizona Town Hall. We are really happy to have you here. And while we're waiting for a few more people joining us, we have on your screen the tribal wheel. You can start to get accustomed with that graphic, that framework, and the beautiful artistry, I might add. And a few other things as we're continuing to have a few people join us. We will be recording this program for those who are not able to join us. And Town Hall does have a YouTube channel. We'll post it there. It may be in some other areas as well. And we certainly encourage you to share it with either individuals, or organizations whom you think could benefit from this information. All right, I think we've hit that magic 10:05 mark. We're going to go ahead and get started so that we can respect your time and the wealth of content and information that we have for you today. So Alex, you can go ahead and take that down. Wonderful. And my name again is Tara Jackson. I have the honor of serving as president of the Arizona Town Hall. If you are not familiar with us, we are a nonprofit organization. We celebrated our 60th birthday last year, so we have been around for a while in the state of Arizona. We are a very unique nonprofit. Our process is studied not only by other states in this country, but by delegations from other countries. So this is truly an Arizona-born concept that is all about bringing diverse perspectives together, representing all of the state of Arizona, and working through what are often the most challenging issues facing our state in a way that builds consensus and strengthens communities. That's what we've been doing for 60 years. And in 2020 and 2021, our topic that we addressed was something we called creating vibrant communities. We didn't know when we selected that topic that we would have this global pandemic, but there could not have been a better topic for us to take on at that time. And one of our amazing partners for this topic and much of the work that we do was the Vitalyst Health Foundation. There's a lot about our mutual missions that we share in trying to make Arizona a better place for all, and looking at what those frameworks are and the information that can support those frameworks for moving together in a way that really does strengthen all of our communities. When we took on the topic of creating vibrant communities and held community town halls and our statewide town hall, we used what has now become known by many as the Vitalyst Wheel, which truly is this amazing framework to look at how to approach using social determinants of health in a way that makes all communities healthy and more vibrant. After that wheel had been developed and we were engaged in all of these community discussions, another amazing effort was taken to develop a wheel specifically to represent a framework for our tribal communities. And that's what we're here to talk about today. And I mentioned that Vitalyst is such an amazing partner for us. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to one of our Vitalyst representatives who will take the program from here. And that is Sergio Perez, who is the Director of Strategic Communications for the Vitalyst Health Foundation. So Sergio, it is all yours.
Thank you, Tara, and thank you all for being here today. I think on behalf of Vitalyst and many of our partners, we're really glad that you're all here. We're really glad that this has gotten such the response rate that it has. I think we had over 200 people register for this. We'll see how many of them actually show up, but we're really excited to see that you're all here. Hopefully there's some insights that you will all walk away with, and we're really glad that you're here. Like Tara said, we were very involved in the 2021 Arizona Town Hall on creating vibrant communities. And part of what we wanted to do was bring together some of you and really not talk just about the elements of a healthy community wheel, which, like Tara said, has been known as the Vitalyst wheel. And that framework is just letting the world know that health is more than just healthcare, right? That things like access to quality food impact our health, things like community justice and all of the other elements that go into a healthy community. And so we had done that in 2017, and we took that on a roadshow. John Ford, my predecessor, and Suzanne really went on the road and let the world know that this was happening. And at about 2019, Michael Allison, who was the former tribal liaison with the Arizona Department of Health Services, came to Suzanne and said, great, you guys are all thinking about this in terms of circles, which, as tribal members, we've been thinking about this for hundreds of years, but you're still missing a little part of this that you're not really bringing into this conversation. And so that began a process with Vitalyst and bringing together key advisors like Kim Russell, who's on the call today, Michael Allison, and then the Intertribal Council of Arizona, who we brought together about 17 of the tribes of the 22 tribes across Arizona to really provide us their input and really figure out, okay, let's take this elements of a healthy community and how do we apply this thinking into tribal communities. And so we brought together those tribes through several convening sessions. And part of what they did was they provided the input that has now created the tribal wheel. And so if you go to the Vitalyst website, you can see the tribal wheel. You can see it side by side with the elements of a healthy community and see how some of those elements correspond. But there's cultural nuances that, the traditional wheel does not have. And that's what this tribal wheel really provides is, all of the family aspects, all of the, from beginning of life to end of life. And there's so much cultural knowledge within this wheel. And that's what we're hoping that this presentation provides you. And you can all walk away with it, hopefully with a little bit more knowledge. And, just don't be afraid to ask questions when the panel is finished. If there's something that you think, you might not want to ask, I guarantee you there's other people out there who want to have asked that same question. So don't be afraid. This is the right audience for you to ask those questions, because that's how we all grow. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the panel. The first part of it is going to be Kim Russell, who's the director of the Arizona Advisory Council on Indian Healthcare. She does a great presentation on the tribal wheel, its origins, how it came about, and every single one of the quadrants. So she's going to give us that presentation for about 20 minutes. And then after that, we will have a panel with Priscilla Foote, the Chief Behavioral Health Officer with Gila River Indian Healthcare, and Holly Figueroa, who's the tribal liaison with Blue Cross Blue Shield of Arizona Health Choice. So hopefully they will all provide a different perspective for you all, and we can all learn together. So without further ado, Kim, it is your time to let the world know about the tribal wheel.
All right, thank you, Sergio. I do have a PowerPoint. I do see it coming up. So good morning, everybody. My name is Kim Russell, and I'm with the Arizona Advisory Council on Indian Healthcare. I've been a part of our state agency for about almost nine years now, and of course worked really closely with Vitalyst and Mr. Allison and Ms. Montiel, who used to be with the Intertribal Council of Arizona, to kind of bring this concept to you. So I think, Sergio, you did a really great job of kind of giving some of the history, how starting in 2019, we started to work with Vitalyst on this particular wheel, this particular tool. So thank you, Sergio, for that background. What I'd like to do in the time that I have is just kind of give you an overview of the wheel and maybe point out some areas of the wheel that are a little bit different than the wheel that was originally put together by Vitalyst Foundation. So you'll see on this first screen the wheel that our 17 tribes put together. Like Sergio had said, we met with tribes throughout the state of Arizona. I think it took like about a good year or so in a few different convenings with tribes in Arizona, and 17 of them being represented in those meetings. And so this is the outcome of those meetings. We had a really great graphic artist who was able to gather all of our thoughts and put this into the wheel that you see here today. The one thing I do want to mention is that, this wheel is not very different from the original Vitalyst wheel. I look at the Vitalyst wheel and also this one, I kind of see those kind of pieces of the pie of the wheel, so to speak. And so those would be like the pieces that are in the light green area on the wheel here. The other thing I want to point out before I move forward is that if you can kind of conceptualize that the different circles of the wheel, they're always kind of turning. So this is not a static wheel. I think on the Vitalyst website, you can actually see the wheel turning. So I just wanted to mention that it's not a static wheel. The different pieces will interact with the other wheels as you kind of work through, really trying to figure what are the elements of a healthy tribal community. So again, this is a wheel, a tool that we've created for tribes and really anybody to use. And I think we're going to talk a little bit more later today about different ways that the wheel can be used, which I'm really excited about, because I think that was something that Suzanne and John and Sergio, we're trying to figure, okay, now that we created this wheel, how can we use it? And so we started to brainstorm about how can we use this? It's a great tool, right? And we're letting people know about it, but how can you use it? So I do want to say that the wheel can be used by tribes and people who aren't from tribes, and you'll hear a little bit more about that. I'm excited about some of the next steps that we are going to take with Vitalyst to really use this wheel in the future. So anyway, here is the wheel. Again, not very different from the original wheel, but you'll see some pieces that are a little bit different that I'll talk about here shortly. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So again, we started this work in 2019 and 22 based on the input of our tribes, and just longstanding values are identified that align with the factors that contribute to one's personal health and more broadly to the overall health of a tribal community. The wheel is a tool that can guide the development of policies, funding sources, and programs generated by tribal governments through resources involved in providing healthcare services to American Indian Alaska Native people. So I think first and foremost, like I mentioned earlier, it is a tool, but how do you use the tool? The wheel was designed to correspond to traditional knowledge connected to the 4 directions and the stages of life, medicinal plants, animals, and healing ways aligned to the quadrants of the earth and sky. The center represents the core of Mother Earth, and next the soil, rivers, and oceans that give us sustenance. The participants identified factors that enhance our personal health and that of our families, and how these link to the overall well-being of a tribal community. Next slide. I don't think our tribal communities define a healthy community very much different than any other community, right? I think we all want similar things. So how the tribes came together to define it was, a healthy tribal community is one where families have the opportunity to live in balance from birth to an elderly age within environments that are clean, safe, and promote wellness. A tribal perspective is that one's health is influenced by cultural and environmental knowledge that sustained tribal communities prior to colonization that may be adapted to influence our quality of life. And these factors stem from overarching values that have continued to influence individual wellness in tribal communities. So a lot of cultural knowledge that we hold in our communities that we still implement into our communities today. And we feel like those are very protective factors in our community that we would like to enhance and build upon. Next slide. So I think this is where we get a little bit different when we talk about working with tribal communities. I do want to mention that we have tribal communities on and off reservation. And I think depending on how you work with them, it'll pertain. But when we talk with our tribes, the 17 tribes, these are 4 principles, guiding principles that came out of our conversations that are not included in the original wheel. And I think these principles are really important to be aware of and understand so that it will assist in working with tribes, advocating for policy development, resource allocation, and so forth. So let me just quickly go through these 4 principles, again, not in the original wheel, but beliefs and spirituality. They're a long-held foundational knowledge that's considered true based on traditional cultural practices, connection to sacred places, plant and animal knowledge, and for some faith-based religious experience. So just beliefs and spirituality. And I think we'll talk a little bit about that in our panel, a little bit more detail. Resiliency and way of life. Resilience is a cultural value or trait that helps one cope with life's challenges, striving for balance when there's imbalance and recourse in negative situations to sustain the tribe or one's way of life. Again, I think we'll go into a little bit more. Of course, we really held this principle true throughout COVID and really forever since we've been here. And then self-determination. I don't think you can have true conversations with tribes if you're not talking about self-determination. Decision-making, policy, or program development based on the tribe's choices in which outside influences or policies are weighted factors of consideration. And then the last principle that came out of our conversations was sovereignty and tribal governance. It's important to understand that when you're working with tribal communities, that's a huge principle, huge component of where they are coming from. And that's tribal form of government internally influenced by cultural values and norms, historical factors and actions in which policy implications have been considered. So those are the 4 tribal principles of sustaining health pertinent to the wheel. Next slide, please. So this here, the social determinants of health, again, I always refer to them as the pieces of the pie, right? That's in the original wheel. We did not add or take any of these pieces away to the tribal wheel, and they are all here. So quality housing, employment, they are all here. So basically those social determinants of health, they're also included in the tribal wheel. Next slide, please. And so here is the wheel again. So just to kind of recap from what I just mentioned, you'll see around I guess, let me start with the outside of the wheel. One thing that the tribes wanted to make sure that was added to the wheel was just a connection of people. So you'll see the people, men and women kind of holding their hands. We thought, should we put children in there? But we just wanted to explain that there's a connection in our community and that we're very holistic. I don't think it's really hard for us, at least for me, to have an individual mindset. And I think that really helped us with our getting through COVID, I feel. And so that's what that part represents. And then you'll see in the circle that's a little bit inward, the turquoise ones, that's the principles that I just mentioned. So beliefs and spirituality, resiliency, way of life, self-determination, and then sovereignty and tribal governance. And then, of course, the next circle, which is the light green, would be those social determinants of health. And then the community around that, family, again, just going back to the spirituality, emotional, mental, physical state of a person. And that's what we feel compromises the elements of a healthy tribal community from the conversations we had with our tribes here in Arizona. I do want to also mention that when we were doing the wheel, we were talking to our tribes, we did some research and looking at other types of paradigms that are similar to this. We recognize that that tribes have similar tools as well. I saw a lot of this in behavioral health programming. So we want to also recognize that this isn't a new concept, that tribes already have some sort of, I guess, paradigm that they use in their program planning already. We also found some tools that we found from the Canadian tribes.
I wanted to make sure it was me, but I think we've lost Kim briefly. So Kim has frozen a little bit. Can everyone hear me? For those who are on video, I just want to make sure that it's okay. So it is Kim's video. I wonder if, Sergio, we should move to our next speaker and then come back to Kim as soon as we get her again.
So Kim was going to give the presentation and then we were going to break into the panel. So let's see. This is
Kim
the fun
is
part
joining
about
us
Zoom.
again.
Okay.
And maybe while she's joining us, I should encourage anyone who has a question of the panel, you can always throw that in the chat room, and the speakers or Sergio can certainly view that and work it into their comments. Yay, Kim is back. Okay, I'll throw it back to Kim.
Weather has something to do with my internet connection, so sorry for that drop there. You want me to just continue, Tara? I think I'm almost done here. So I think the last stated that, this is a tool and that there's other types of tools that some of our tribes use and that we did research. So this is just what we kind of came out of here in Arizona. We also let people know that they can take this tool and adapt it according to their community. So this isn't the final tool. It's adaptable and they can use it however it best see fit. So like personally, this would be me personally, but I would probably add animals in that tribal community. That to me, that's what would that's what I would include when we talk about a healthy tribal community, because I'm a sheep herder. I have sheep, so I would include animals into that. So again, this is an adaptable tool. So go ahead and go to that next slide, please. I'll just go through these slides really quickly, but these are, again, these don't just coincide to these areas like beliefs and spirituality, but these are just your social determinants of health here: social cohesion, social justice, environment. I'll go ahead and go to the next slide. And then access to care, food access, land use, and preservation. Again, I don't think this is different from any other community. I feel like our tribal communities would define a healthy tribal community very similar to other communities. And then next slide as well. And then economy, education, and safety. We got to all have good economies, good education systems, safety environments to contribute to a healthy tribal community. And the next slide. And then, of course, transportation. How do we design a community? And housing. It just so happens that I am at a housing conference today. And I just bought a t-shirt that they're selling through the Arizona Housing Coalition where it says, housing is a human right. I almost wore that t-shirt today just to kind of display that, in order for a community to be healthy, we got to think about housing as well. So I think what's important about the wheel, and what I also encourage my staff and the agency that I'm a part of, is that we need to work outside of our silos, right? How do we start to work outside of our silos? So I'm so excited to be at this housing conference today to talk about how do we as the state of Arizona increase the number of housing that's available for Arizonans here. And I'm excited to be kind of moving into that space as the Arizona Advisory Council on Indian Healthcare, because historically, we've always kind of been in our lane or in our silo of health and healthcare policy and advocacy. But through a grant through the Arizona Health Improvement Plan from ADHS, we are going to start moving into the housing lane, so to speak. And we are going to conduct a community resource and needs assessment around housing. We are going to do that in close collaboration with 4 other state agencies. So I'm really happy that our tribal liaisons from the Arizona Department of Health Services, the Arizona Healthcare Cost Containment System, First Things First, and the Department of Economic Security, that we all are going to come together collectively to work on this housing assessment. We are going to take a slant with our regular stakeholders who are healthcare professionals. So we're going to have this assessment be viewed and surveyed with our health directors. And I think that's going to be an interesting slant that we're going to take when we talk about housing, getting the opinions from our tribal health directors and those that kind of are normally in that space of healthcare. So excited to be at the housing conference today, and just I think overall excited to be able to work in a space where we can really start to work outside of our silo and kind of go into those other pieces of the pie, right, that I kind of mentioned earlier. So I think we have a few more slides and I'm almost finished here. Can you go to the next slide, please? So just to acknowledge key advisors, of course, myself and Michael Allison. This is a project between Vitalyst Foundation and Intertribal Council of Arizona. I do want to recognize Ms. Alita Montiel, who's been a mentor to many of us here. She did leave us in December, but she was a huge part of the development of the tribal wheel, and we always thank her for all the advocacy that she has contributed to our tribal nations here in Arizona. And of course, a big thank you to our 17 tribes that participated in the sessions and helped us develop this wheel that that's been presented today. And I think that might be my last slide. Oh, and just contact information. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Kim. Again, I put the link in the chat. If any of you have any questions or you want to see the wheel in motion, like Kim mentioned, Alita was a huge part of this, and she was really adamant that the wheel was not a static wheel, even though on paper it's represented as a static wheel. It's not static. So one of the things she really wanted us to work on, and made it, a little challenging, was to really make that wheel move. So if you go to the website, you can move that wheel, and the inner and the outer rings will all have motion. So thank you for that, and thank you for bringing up Alita's work. She was a huge part of this as well. So thank you for that. And now we get to move into the fun part of this, which is you guys get to answer some questions, and we all get to learn from you all three, right? So again, for those of you who may have joined late, our panel is comprised of Holly Figueroa, who is the tribal liaison at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Arizona Health Choice, Priscilla Foote, who's the chief behavioral health officer at Gila River Indian Healthcare, and she is a Vitalyst Health Foundation board trustee, and Kim Russell, who is a director, the director of the Arizona Advisory Council on Indian Healthcare. So intersectionalities of different aspects that intersect all of our lives. So hopefully their perspectives will give us some insight. So I'll just start off with the first question. First question is to all of you. So whichever one of you wants to take it first, have at it. You all represent different organizations in your daily lives, but you all bring different lived experiences to our panel. So we just saw the overview of the elements of a healthy tribal community wheel. How does your personal experience growing up, or even now, match up with what was presented in the wheel? So. Priscilla, why don't you go first?
I'm happy to go first. Good morning, everybody. As Sergio said, I'm Priscilla Foote. I'm Akamal'atham, Pipash, Chimwevi, and Kauia. I'm a member of the Gila River Indian community. I work as I'm a social worker by training, and work as the chief behavioral health officer at Gila River Healthcare on the Gila River Indian community. Growing up, in looking at this wheel and growing up, I think one of the things I thought about it was the idea of my tribe having community in its name, Gila River Indian community, and that's very purposeful. And that was what the creators of our community felt, that it was important that being in a part of a community is that you're an individual who's part of something bigger than yourself. And, growing up in my family, I had the great fortune of being in a family that had a lot of really invested and involved people in our community, whether that's through different service providers, through education, through healthcare. And growing up, it was sitting at the table at family gatherings and people talking about the inner workings of the community. So it's always been my impression that everything has to work together, and that the community, each individual has a responsibility to identify things that need to get fixed and try and help problem solve. So that definitely shows up in the wheel in terms of understanding that we're a part of something bigger, that we depend on others to make a community work, and we have responsibility as an individual to participate actively in a healthy community. It's not have people do things for me or do things to me, but be at the table as part of the discussion and help lead those discussions on creating better communities. I think as Kim mentioned, she'd have animals. I was thinking, what do I think might be missing or could be enhanced on this? And I really think the role of elders in our community cannot be overstated. Elders are very politically active, and they've earned that right to have that lived experience, to have their lifetime of experiences. And in tribal communities in general, I think the elders are very much looked at for guidance. They are sought after for information. What do you need? And they'll let it be known what they need and to be responsive to them. So I think adding elders somehow in that role, in my mind, is something that's really important. Thanks, Sergio.
Thank you, Priscilla. What about you, Holly? Let's go to Holly.
Nikwang talongva na Holly Figueroa pahan matsiwa na talo manam hopi matsiwa na tawangwa na sapalangak sino na navatok obi amkita. Good morning, everyone. I'm Holly Figueroa. I come from Hopi. I'm from the Sun Clan, and I live here in Flagstaff, where it is we're getting snow as we speak, and it's so pretty. But I am the tribal liaison for Blue Cross Blue Shield Arizona Health Choice, or one of the Medicaid, Medicare health plans that serve Northern and Central Arizona. And just thanks for the opportunity to be here and have this conversation about the wheel. And actually, I remember when it was being developed, when Michael and Alina and everybody was there. And actually, we had a preview when we were in White River. Do you remember that? So it's great to see that it's finally getting the recognition and the awareness. And so to answer your question, for me, I didn't grow up on the reservation. We were a military family, and so we moved all across the country. But my father, who is from Hopi as well, was very intentful in instilling the cultural values and teachings of Hopi while we were off reservation, and just really making sure that there was that sense of understanding of the connections between, just people and all the elements around us, and the impact that had on our health and well-being, and really making sure that was taught to us. And so when we did move closer to home, closer to Hopi, and the summers that I stayed out there and grew up in my teenage years, really seeing the impact of what those teachings that were happening off reservation all those years growing up, really kind of being seen in action. The connections of people, the connections to the land, to the water, the gatherings that we have, the ceremonies that we have, how all of that ties into, whether or not, the men can go hunting, if they can go fishing, just making sure that we had total respect for all living things, and understanding that respect and that humility that we are taught really kind of comes back to us in that level of respect for everything around us in our health and wellness. We talked about integrated care coming into Arizona in 2018, and it was kind of funny because it's like a lot of our indigenous people have always practiced integrated care, mind, body, soul, and spirit. And so really being able to leverage what has been put into that wheel and how we've kind of been already living that, but how do we leverage that wheel in the work that we're doing has really been a great tool to be able to, visually show and speak to all those different elements and how we can use that as part of our work and use that in securing funding for different things. But that's how I see the impact for me, growing up off reservation and now being home and now working with multiple tribes and having to learn and be respectful of all of those things and the variation as well. I think variation is huge. We have 22 tribes, but we also have a lot of our urban natives who make Arizona their home from many other tribes across the country. So the tool, I believe, is just really helpful. And that's how, in my experiences from growing up to now, I see that there is a great need and just how powerful this tool can be. Thank you.
Thank you, Holly. What about you, Kim?
Sure. The one thing I did mention is that, this is a tool and it is adaptable. Even for me, this is a tool that I would change personally. And for each community, that's what we are encouraging, right? It's just kind of maybe a jumping off point in regards to some sort of tool that can kind of help guide conversations around policy development or resource allocation or, just, planning for a healthy tribal community. So in regards to how it kind of relates to me, I was just thinking about how I was brought up. I was raised on the reservation. And one of the things that I remember very vividly is just to be tough. I don't know if a lot of you all had that teaching growing up, but for me as a Navajo, what was really instilled in us to be tough. And I think, so it's just for an example, my mom would wake us up early in the morning, before the sun even breaks the horizon, and we would go running. Hated it, but now that I look back at it, I'm really glad that she instilled that in us, just that physical toughness, right? To wake up early in the morning, even though you don't want to, you're only like 8, 9, 10 years old, and it's cold outside, right? But what we would do is we would plow our field, and she'd make us run without our shoes on. And of course, our feet would hurt a little bit. Once you get going, though, you're getting fast enough, you don't feel the earth anymore. You don't feel the pain in your feet. And I never understood why she made us do that, but it made me think. It just made me realize she was toughening us up, not only physically, but I think also mentally. She was toughening us up as well. The other thing, again, just kind of reflecting on my personal experience and how I was raised and what was instilled in me, it's just that I think a component of the wheel that doesn't necessarily always come out, but I think also may not necessarily need to come out, is just how we're really spiritual people, right? When I think about health and healthcare, if I have an ailment, the first thing I don't think of is I need to go see my doctor, my primary care doctor. That's not usually how I think. It's more about, okay, what do you think the medicine person might say? Or should we go ask our medicine person about, why am I always having so many migraines? Stuff like that. So one thing that relates to me in the squill, it's not real apparent, is just that there's a huge connection to our spirituality and how we connect back to, I guess, a greater a greater being, right? And then I think one thing I do like about the wheel is just the sense of community and that it is a little bit different. I do really appreciate the different pillars or the different principles that came out of the conversations we had with our tribes, because I think that's where sometimes if we're not from a tribal community or we've not worked with tribes before, that if you don't have those other principles in mind, it's kind of hard to have those conversations with tribes to really build that healthy tribal community. And I'm coming from a policy focus, right? Because the work I do is very policy focused, whether it's at a legislative level or an administrative level. You have to consider sovereignty, you have to consider self-determination, you have to consider these other principles of a healthy tribal community. So that's kind of how I think, just kind of growing up and even today, how that wheel resonates for me. And I always look to the wheel all the time in the work that I do. And I think it also helps me justify the work that it justifies why I'm at a housing conference, right? It does, because housing is healthcare. So that's kind of how I use the tool, and it's a reminder for me to not stay in the lane that I'm always accustomed to, which is health and healthcare. It's okay to maybe go out to the others and see how those other lanes impact the health of the community.
Thank you, Kim, and thanks to all of you. All right, the second question is going to go a little bit deeper into the spokes of the traditional Vitalyst wheel, but different sections of the quadrants within the tribal wheel. So how do social determinants of health impact tribal communities? And then when discussing those social determinants and disparities, what unique factors do we need to be considering when working with tribal communities if we're not part of a tribal group? So who wants to tackle that first?
Sergio, I can start. I mean, I think I kind of alluded to it, just in my prior answer, but those principles, right? You need to consider those other principles that were mentioned in the wheel, sovereignty, self-determination. I'm at a housing conference, and I facilitated a panel, and we had a young lady from, I believe she's Hopi. And the last question we offered to the panel is, what kind of call to action would you like to leave, the audience here? And she talked about safe drinking water, right? It's hard to talk about housing if you're not talking about the access to water issue, right? And even before having access to water, that water needs to be safe enough to drink. So she talked about that. So, for me, talking about housing and then how housing relates to healthcare and how housing and healthcare relate to the environment, they all come together, right? So it's hard to just focus on whatever you're supposed to be working on without being mindful of these other areas. So I was really happy that she was a part of our panel, and that she was willing to kind of give that call to action in regards to thinking about all the other social determinants of health, though it's a housing conference, there's these other pieces we need to consider as well.
Holly or Priscilla?
I'll go next. This one, social determinants of health are huge across the board. And I think when we're talking about tribal communities and understanding that they are all very unique and different. And so I think for me, having a sense of cultural humility and practicing that cultural humility has to be the foundation in any approach in working with any tribal community, and doing your due diligence to understand the community that you're trying to engage, whether it's the clean drinking water, like Kim just mentioned. I know that that's an issue. I go home to the reservation every weekend, and I have to fill water jugs here at my home to take out to the reservation so that I'm using clean drinking water to cook with for my family. And so, you know, having to be mindful of having that clean drinking water or water to use is really important. Understanding the issues around food security as well. This was really apparent during COVID, but even right now, as this winter storm is happening, you know, there's probably many families who are not able to make it to the grocery store to get the food that they need. And even outside of a storm, whether it's winter or floods or whatever, you know, many folks live at least an hour to 3 hours away to have access to those fresh foods. So how are we supporting tribal communities in the way of food security, education, broadband? That's a huge issue, not only for education, but also accessing healthcare. So I think it's, and then the land challenges. You know, we talk a lot about, you know, how can we support tribal communities in you know, creating infrastructure, but we need to understand that every tribal community has a perspective of the land, and that is taken into consideration in making decision as to where things are able to be built or not be built. So that's a big one. And then just, I think overall understanding and acknowledging the variation in each tribal community, and even within tribal communities. For example, Hopi, we have, some will say 12 villages and some are now saying 13 villages, but not all of those villages participate within the tribal government. And so they have their own traditional forms of government. And so understanding the structure, understanding the priorities within tribal communities is really important, because we can try to do what we think is right, but if that tribal community, those leaders, those community members don't have that as a priority, then that's a really big thing to consider. We heard a lot about COVID funding and why people weren't able to spend down COVID funding. Well, some tribal communities were really focused on making sure that their tribal members had food. And so, I mean, I think it's just a matter of understanding that each community is very unique, and that sometimes we're not all on the same priority issues, and to come in with that sense of humility and have done my due diligence and have worked on building a relationship prior to inserting myself into a community is really important, especially because I am from one of the tribal nations, but I also represent a non-tribal entity. So for me, it's a little bit different. I just can't go in and say, hey guys, I'm from Hopi, and this is what we want to do to help support. I still have to work hard on building those partnerships and relationships. So I think in terms of social determinants of health and understanding what that is for each community is really important for those who are trying to partner with tribal communities around those determinants of health.
Thank you, Holly. Priscilla, what about you?
Yeah, I totally agree with Holly in terms of the uniqueness of each tribal community, and that we get into problems when people make assumptions and put assumptions on tribes, on Native Americans. And so it's getting to know people. Every community, every tribe is different. We might have sister tribes and we might be, related that way, but we still, tribal structures are very different. And, I appreciate everybody that's on this call who is wanting to learn more or has been involved and invested in working with tribal communities, because there's always more to learn, right? I think that in looking at the tribal wheel versus the original wheel, there are some subtle differences in the terminology, but that's purposeful, and I think that in looking at it in the tribal wheel, there's family listed, which isn't necessarily, and then as Kim pointed out, there's people on it. And, you know, when you look at even the terminology of food access, you know, on the tribal wheel and in the original wheel, it was quality, affordable food. So there's a difference between having an item of quality, affordable food versus access to food, you know, and I think that's important. I think also looking at land use versus maybe, I think I saw like environmental quality, you know, land use is very important. And I think people have a misconception about the land in tribal communities. Like Holly said, some land is not developable. I don't know what that word is, but it's off limits for cultural reasons, you know, heritage reasons, and so that's not being able to develop. You can't consider that land as an option. Some land is, and you get into, you know, policy about allotted land. You know, some land is actually allotted in families, and you need family permission to do that. So, I mean, there's, you know, you might look out on tribal communities, think all this land, all this opportunity, but it's the infrastructure that needs to be developed. It's the cold developable. It's the cold, you know, it really is tribal specific. Also economy, and looking at economic opportunity versus economy. And economy to me was, there's very opportunity for economic development among the tribes. And some tribes who, for example, Gila River Indian community, who is very adjacent to the Phoenix metro area, has more opportunity for economic development in a number of ways than other tribes who are more remote. So I think that that's something that some tribes have more ability for tourism if they want to do that. Not all tribes want to. You know, I think it's very important to be able to look at where each tribe is in terms of their perspective and philosophy on what they want for their community. And I think asking those questions and coming in, you know, being respectful and listening more than talking, I think is always a good way to go. Tribal, I think one of the other pieces that I wanted to mention is, and Kim had talked about this, was the spirituality piece. I was on a WebEx yesterday, and I was actually talking about substance use and prevention and recovery and treatment. And somebody had commented that he was a traditional healer, and he went into a outside provider agency. This was in another state, and wanted to do ceremony and had some medicinal medicine for an individual that was in treatment. And he was told, it's not medicine unless it's in a bottle with a prescription. So just, you know, dagger to the heart. It was really a definite opportunity to see, okay, different worldview, different perspective, but there has to be space for understanding and for acceptance and recognition of all spiritual cultural beliefs in helping in treatment. This was somebody who was in treatment and was trying to get support and encouragement from their traditional people, like Kim was talking about, and to be denied that access and opportunity really was a disconnect. So it's being able to, for looking at, and in my organization, many people refer to the social influencers of health, because determinants really is predestined. It's there. It's not changeable. It's set in stone. But an influencer is something that seems a little bit more pliable. Seems like there's a strategy to affect change. So I'm used to hearing it that way. But I think that the wheel in itself is a good tool. I have the wheel up on my, like Kim said, I have it on my bulletin board in my office. And you know, it's a little comforting to see that I think it also takes the onus off one entity to fix everything, right? You know, there's a social issue. For example, at Gila River, we were, and in many tribal communities, the issue of suicide and suicide prevention. And we developed a work group many years ago to talk about and come up with initiatives to address suicide in the community and to look at suicide prevention. We have everybody at the table, and it was very interesting. We had housing there. We had Boys and Girls Club, of course, education, you know, we had healthcare there, emergency department, fire department, EMS, police department, you know, it was with the courts, probation officers. And some people were there kind of like, what am I doing here? This is about suicide prevention. And we're like, well, let's talk about why are you here? You know, and everybody was able to take a piece and see, okay, this is what I can do for suicide prevention, even as far as training their staff about what is suicide and how do you look for those things. So it was opening up those eyes to getting this model in practice. And since then, other initiatives have come up in the community and people have said, we should run it like the suicide, it's called Suicide Gap Work Group. We should run it like the Suicide Gap. So then it's a duplicate, you can duplicate the model. And that's what this shows to me. You know, so I think it's a very useful tool. I like that it's flexible. I love the idea of kind of rotating it around to see how each thing lines up with other pieces. Yeah, I appreciate that very much. Thanks, Sergio.
And now we get into individual questions for the three of you. Priscilla, you already kind of started answering this. So if there's something else you can bring into it, great. You represent a tribal behavioral health authority. So you've already sort of told us a little bit how you used it with suicide prevention, but how else have you used the wheel within your organization and the larger Gila River community?
Yeah, you know, I think that the Suicide Gap work group was definitely kind of the beginning of that. We've started talking about using it to address diabetes and health. Of course, you know, looking at crime, you know, just in general, how do we affect change in terms of crime and judicial system? You know, I think that the more we have people talking together, the more we get to know about it. I was in a meeting yesterday. So, wow, I was busy yesterday. I was in another meeting yesterday, and there was a discussion, and it was we met with a consultant, and I was talking about a specific issue in the community. And the consultant, of course, comes in and tells us what we know already, is that the other entities don't know what each other's doing. And everybody's doing good stuff, but you guys don't know what the other people are doing, and they don't know what you're doing. And this is something that happens not just in the Gila community, it's everywhere in all different sorts of systems. And so using models like this, I think really helps us say, all right, we need to be together. You know, when you talk about even behavioral health integration into healthcare, into medical, you know, it's so funny when we see the light bulbs go off in our different departments. I didn't know you did that. I didn't know you could do that. And when we have our light bulb go off, when we hear about things that other entities are doing, just makes a stronger community, and it provides better care for our community members. The other piece of that is the community voice. And a lot of the initiatives that come through, you know, you write reports and you present reports in our tribal structure. There's tribal council. And so we provide reports to tribal council. And they accept the information, and their next comment is usually take it to the community. And in Gila River, we're divided up into 7 districts, and each district has a community kind of service center and community meetings. And so we take it to the community, and it's giving them that information, getting their input, getting their direction, and providing that education. And I think that's really important, to make sure the community is involved in decision-making and in getting, that Kim talked about community needs assessment, getting that community key stakeholder interview information on projects, because we're spinning our wheels, no pun intended, if we're not getting that information and bringing everybody to the table. It makes the job easier for all of us. Thanks.
Thank you, Priscilla. Now we're going to switch it over to Kim. Kim, you work with many agencies across the state. You mentioned DES, First Things First, AZDHS. I know there's a couple more that I can't recall right now. But how can the wheel be utilized to help organizations and individuals be better prepared to work with tribal groups?
All right, well, I love this question. I've worked in state government for a total of over 10 years. There aren't a lot of American Indians in state government, first of all. So coming into state government really quickly recognized the lack of knowledge of tribes across the board, right? So there was always a constant educational process that had to be undertaken for everybody that you worked with. Really quickly had to educate the staff that you were going to be working on. And then sometimes some didn't want to be educated. So it was very frustrating to work in some spaces where that occurred, right? So working in state government where you're the minority, not only as a people, but the policies and systems that are kind of put in place. It was very frustrating. So now I'm a part of an agency where we are just focused on tribes and tribal communities. So that's great. So the people coming to work for my agency have to know how to work with tribes, right? And a lot of our staff are non-native. So coming into this space, and I'm not just going to say non-native staff, even tribe people who are native who work for my agency, they need education as well as to how to work with tribes as well, because we have our different experiences as well. Maybe we weren't raised on a reservation, or we never worked for a tribe, or whatever it is. I don't want to say it's just for non-native staff people. It's across the board, right? So I think that's one way this tool could be utilized. And really using the tool maybe as an exercise. And I know, Sergio, we talked about how we could, the next steps of this tool. One thing that I envision the tool being used as is a learning tool with whether it's state agencies, even tribal organizations themselves, just organizations as themselves, using it as a tool that can have conversation amongst those in the organization about really working with tribes. So to just give you an example of how the tool could be used, let's take housing, since I'm at the housing conference today. How do you start working with tribes when, in terms of trying to address housing instability and security? If you're not going to talk to them about the environment, right? I think Priscilla talked about there's just certain places that there's just not a question to develop housing or anything on. So I think that's how you can kind of use that tool there, right? And then another part of the tribal wheel is the sovereignty. What are the laws that the tribes have in place when you talk about housing? So I think just using the wheel as a tool, right? We can make maybe certain scenarios for organizations to kind of walk through, right? And I got the idea when I was presenting on this tool. I think it was to a national audience. I want to say it was a National Indian Health Board audience at one of their conferences. And I think it was an individual who worked with the university system in their state. And they asked me, how can we use this tool with our counterparts within the university system? And I thought, oh, that's a great idea. So I think that Sergio, and I know we talked about this, but I think that's going to be the next step for this tool, is to create maybe scenarios. Not sure how it might, or just scenarios so that we can all kind of walk through it as an organization, right? And then you kind of become aware of the different parts of the tribal wheel that you need to consider when you are working with tribal communities. So it's a tool that the tool has an opportunity for individuals, tribal or non-tribal, to really kind of work through how would you approach working with the tribe when it comes to a particular issue that you are working on. So I think I'm excited about that next step. And again, working with organizations, within state government, I think there's still opportunity for growth and knowledge of really how to work with tribes. We have had some successes, I guess you could say. We do have tribal consultation policies. It used to be by executive order that all of the state agencies underneath the executive branch have a tribal consultation policy, and that they have a staff member to implement that policy. Now it's actually state law. So all of the state agencies underneath the executive branch of government have to have a tribal consultation policy and somebody who implements it. So we've had some successes, but I think this can maybe be another potential growth in state government, or really just any agency, in terms of understanding the different nuances of working with tribes. So really excited about that next step, Sergio. One of the things that I don't want to happen with the tool, because a lot of tribes contributed to it, right? And Vitalyst did invest in this, is just to have it as a tool, and here it is, and you figure out how to work with it. I think we need to make this next step of these are ways that you can use the tool. So that's on the I guess the side of maybe state government and maybe organizations that don't traditionally work with tribes. But the tool can also be used within a tribe. So that might be another scenario, right? Because this tool isn't just for non-tribal people, it's for everybody to use. So very excited about that next step. It has a lot of opportunity, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Thank you, Kim. All right, now switching over to Holly. Holly, you're in a unique space that crosses healthcare and directly impacts people's everyday lives. How have you used the tribal wheel in your work at Blue Cross Blue Shield?
So, well, I think first of all, it's a great visual, and being able to see the interactivity that it lends for learning, I think is really important. So the visual is really great, but as you look at the wheel and you look at all the pieces in each quadrant, all of those pieces are things that I work on in my role that have an impact on health. So we know that health intersects in many different areas, and so as we're developing programs and how to address, let's say, chronic health issues, and you spin that wheel in the area of transportation, how do we become mindful of what that looks like for a particular tribal community, or in an urban setting, or in a rural setting? What does that look like? And then if you maybe turn it some more, and we go into some of the justice components of it, what does that look like from a healthcare perspective, right? For some of our folks who are justice involved, how are we incorporating the pieces or elements of this wheel into our care coordination efforts within the justice area, whether it's through reach-in programs, or whether it's planning for release for someone who's going back to a tribal community? Are we setting them up for failure? If we're not mindful at a county or state level of what does it mean for this person to be released, to be on probation, and then go back to a tribal community that is like an hour to 2 hours away. So it's how to, you turn the wheel and you think about whatever sector you're in, there's going to be some sort of a healthcare component or a wellness component to it. So in the work that I do, I sit on criminal justice coordinating councils and bring those pieces and elements in. How are we addressing this for our justice involved relatives? How are we addressing homelessness from an Indigenous perspective? All of these areas, I think, are things to be mindful of and consider as you look at this wheel. Also, I use it a lot with training. So I do a lot of tribal sensitivity training I've done for universities in their health departments for those, incoming healthcare professionals who are going to be able to come in from a trauma-informed approach and understand some of the cultural humility pieces that they need to start beginning to realize and practice as they're working with people of color or Indigenous folks in their respective communities. And so that's a big piece to, you're kind of checking off all the boxes. Where is there some sort of a health component in that? So, and also with training with providers, some of our providers who are coming into our state aren't necessarily from our state, and making sure that they understand, what some of the history is. Why is there mistrust? Why is there this hesitation to have this non-tribal entity come in and start working with my relatives? And really understanding what that is. And so it's just the understanding of what all of that means and how it impacts health and how people think about health from an Indigenous perspective. Like Kim mentioned, we all have our own respective teachings about how we think about health and illnesses. If I'm, a pregnant mom and maybe I'm not feeling well, is it something that my partner did, or is it something I did that I think about first before I even think about going to the doctor? It's how we think about sickness and illness that also impacts the way we access care and the way we think about care. So that's really important in making sure that our providers understand that, our tribal partners understand that, and those who are teaching our incoming health professionals to have a sense of understanding that and really work on practicing that sense of cultural humility. I know I talk a lot about a cultural humility, but I just absolutely believe that we need to be able to address power imbalances. We need to be more, practice more humility with one another and learning about one another before we are trying to build this relationship or this partnership with one another. So I think for me, it's really about bringing down those barriers, those the stigma, the assumptions, the perceptions about, and even some of the race and discrimination that we know some of our people still experience in the health industry, unfortunately. It's bringing down those walls and really working on building those bridges for both sides. I'm in that unique position where I'm a liaison. I'm working to educate my tribal communities and helping to build the trust, but I'm also trying to support my agency entity and making sure that they are practicing the cultural humility and that they are educated and understand what it means to work with tribal communities, to what it's like to work with tribal nations, and to really understand what time it takes as well to sit there and listen. Like Priscilla said, a lot of times it's sitting there and listening to the stories and the experiences that are really helping to build those competencies. And so for the utilization of the wheel, it can be used in so many different situations, but again, if you envision spinning this wheel in any quadrant for any particular area, it all comes down to how are we able to bring two entities or two individuals, whatever it is, together with that sense of understanding of how we're going to create these health outcomes, because the more vibrant and safe a community is, the better outcomes we're going to see on multiple levels, whether it's economic and whether it's just having a sense of safe community. There's so many things right now that we're working on here in Arizona that are impacting our tribal communities, that impact just even a sense of safety, that we're really trying to make sure that we're educating, bringing awareness, and I believe that this tool can help with that in any of the work that we do. So I'll stop there because I think I could just go on and on and on, but so many pieces. I didn't want to forget the justice component of the will, because I think that that's very important in understanding. And I think one last thing about justice is I think that a lot of our non-tribal partners fail to understand that a lot of our tribal jails do not have nursing services within them. And so, detention officers are left to kind of help support those who are in jail with their health and wellness. And as a detention officer, does a detention officer want to have that responsibility? So how can we support our BIA, our veterans as well? I think really using it from a veteran perspective as well is really important. So again, I think it's just has the ability to address many different areas of health and wellness within communities.
Thank you, Holly. All right, let's do a time check. It's 11:20. I have one last question for the three of you on the panel. So if you can keep those answers slightly concise. I know it's hard because, as somebody mentioned in the chat, you guys are all natural storytellers. But if we can leave space for one or two questions that might come up from the audience, that would be great. So question is, what can you tell organizations who are just starting their journey working with tribal groups? So what should they know? What should they watch out for? What is there?
I can take that one really. I think I talked a lot about it already. I think for me, some of the main points is understanding what sovereignty means and how that impacts the work that you do. Understanding that consultation, true consultation, is meaningful face-to-face conversation with tribal communities and the organization, and understanding tribal policy. What does that mean? And again, how does that impact your work? The priorities that a tribal community has, and understanding it might be different from community to community. Being trauma informed in your approaches are, I think, going to help with the success of the work that you're doing, and go in with a sense of commitment and genuineness. We can all tell when someone is ingenuine in their conversations with you. And I think just having a good way to communicate with one another. Communication styles are very different. And so as you're beginning these conversations, you need to have someone who's really able to be that good communicator, who's going to have that good connection with whomever you're working with in a tribal community. So I think it's finding who your champions are, having those good connections, that sense of commitment, and being willing to sit and listen and then have conversation after. So those are the things that I would say. Cultural humility all the way. And I think that those are some of the main points that I would recommend for any agency entity that is wanting to work with tribal communities.
Thank you. Priscilla, what about you?
Yeah, I want to add I guess it's interesting, in terms of wanting to start projects, and anybody who says, I'm going to ask the tribes, I'm going to partner with a tribe. I think that is awesome because a lot of people don't think about tribes. And a lot of people don't, it's an unknown. People who live in Arizona don't think about tribes a lot of the times. They don't know where different tribes are. And so education's always good. I think that it's important, though, that in my experience, the tribe has this different set of timelines, which can become frustrating to organizations who aren't used to that. And tribal timelines, usually things take a little bit longer. I mentioned tribal council. If, say, for example, you have a grant that needs tribal approval, you are lucky enough maybe to have somebody who writes the grant, and let alone a grant writer, that's usually not an option, but you have somebody who does it on the weekends and at night and writes a grant. And then in my community, you would take it to, your department division director, and then you would take it to executive leadership for GRHC, and then they might approve it and take it to the board of directors at GRHC. They would approve it, and then you take it to one of the standing committees of the tribal council. They maybe one, maybe more than one. They would approve it, and then you take it to tribal council, and then they could approve it. Now, and all these people don't meet every day. They might meet twice a month. And at any one of those times, you might get, well, you need to edit this. I don't like this part. You need to take it back and resubmit. So, I think looking at timelines, if you've got a, even 90-day timeline to get something approved, that's going to be really tough. So some of these grants, even federal grants where you see that there's a timeline and it's due in 2 months, we don't even look at it because there's no way to get it written and go through the approval process to move through. So when we look at that piece in tribal communities, it's about equity. It's about really understanding that the process has to be set up with all of the people that are listed as potential applicants, that it fits within their timelines. Because you'll see grants where it says, tribes can apply, cities can apply, those kind of things, counties. And in a lot of the situations, it doesn't meet tribal guidelines. It doesn't meet tribal, it isn't equitable for tribes to participate. So I think that timelines is something that's important. I also think that, there are champions out there. There are people in tribal communities who are trying to make it happen. And they're just looking for partners. And there's a lot of opportunity, but it also is coming from a space of having to understand maybe some skepticism or maybe some apprehension about partnerships because of our lived history, because of the historical trauma and the prejudice and the racism that tribal communities have had to endure. There's natural suspicion about entities. And it doesn't mean it can't be overcome, and it hasn't been overcome. I mean, there's good partnerships going on, but that coming at that from that perspective and keeping that in mind, I think is also useful. Thanks.
Kim, do you have anything to?
Sure, I'll quickly, I think Holly and Priscilla kind of touched on a lot of great parts, but one thing I want to emphasize, it's going to take time. It's not going to be a few meetings and, let's figure it out. I mentioned that I'm a part of my agency for about almost 9 years now. But we didn't go into grants and IGAs with our tribes until 2 years ago. So it took a number of years for me as a director to kind of build relationships with tribes, gain their trust, really understand what their priorities were before we even started to write a grant. And when we wrote the grant, they were collectively working with us on it. So the point being is there's time that needs to be invested, meaningful time to create those relationships with tribal communities. And I think that's just common across all communities. right? It's just a respectful thing to do. But when I was at yesterday during the panel that I was facilitating, one of a nurse practitioner that works for one of the tribes, her closing statement that I wanted to share with you all is, she said, you may see a person without a shoe. And so you go over and you offer them a shoe, but what they really need is a loaf of bread. And so what the point she was trying to make is you can't assume what they need. You need to talk to them. So I know that there's some questions about how do we work with them? How do we connect with them for maybe their program or for the grant that they're in? But it's just we're all human. Just open up those communication lines and start trying to make those connections. I think sometimes as well, it may be a couple of attempts to talk to somebody, but if I'm not the right person to talk to about an initiative or something that you're working on, I will refer you to someone else, right? So I'll just go ahead and end there, Sergio. Thank you.
Thank you all. We have 1 minute left. There's a couple questions we had in the chat, but Priscilla, Holly, Kim, if you guys don't mind, I might just take those offline and email you and connect all of you to answer those questions. Jim, for example, had a question about diagramming the process that Priscilla mentioned, right? There's lots of steps. So people might know how long things might take. And then Sarah, with the End of Life Care Partnership, is interested in learning more about hearing from tribal communities regarding attitudes and priorities to end of life care and what matters most. So if you guys don't mind, I might try to just connect all of you through email and have some follow-up that way, because we are at time. But thank you all for participating. Thanks to Town Hall for convening us. Again, just want to reiterate to Holly, Priscilla, Kim, thank you all. Thank you to Tara and Alex at Town Hall for convening this group. We hope it was informative. And if you have any questions here at Vitalyst Health Foundation, we are an open source to anyone. You can find any one of our emails at vitalysthealth.org. You just click on about and all of our email addresses are available. So we can, if we don't know the answer to something, we will try to connect you to somebody who will. So Tara, is there anything else you wanted to add or plug in?
A few quick things. First, thank you, Sergio, for getting together this amazing panel. It was truly an education. And we always like, as part of our mission, to empower you. And I know there is lots of information that many of you will be using going forward. I would suggest simply posting the tribal wheel anywhere in your workplace and sharing it with others is a start for that insight. Housing came up a lot today. And I want to add, since Suzanne Feaster is on the call with us, that she will be on Verizon tomorrow evening, specifically talking about the most recent town hall topic we had, which relates to, of course, all of this. And that topic was mental health, substance use, and homelessness. So tune in tomorrow night for that and for some other things we have going. Our topic this year that we will be engaging in full on really after April is equity for all Arizonans. If you are interested in being a part of discussions or addressing those topics, health equity is part of that. It can be whatever the equitable issue is that a community wants to address. Please feel free to reach out. Our topic after that, this also came up today, is democracy and elections. And then if you want to choose a topic, it's not too late to do it, to weigh in. Alex is posting the link to vote on our topic for the following year. And you might want to save the date for June 19th, which is our annual meeting, when we take those top topics from the votes, have speakers, and then that is where those are selected. Again, I want to thank you all for taking this time, especially for our panel, for providing so much helpful information and education for us, and for Vitalyst as always being such a wonderful partner in these efforts. So thanks to all of you. Take care.
Asquili, thank you.